So the past couple of years, I've been hearing a lot about VO2 Max, specifically linking to benefits in cardiorespiratory fitness. But what is it? How's it linked to longevity? And what actions can you take to improve it? We're going to answer them right now. So the reason I'm starting this channel is because I've been playing with these topics for a while, VO2 max, fasting, creatine, but I've never given it the attention it deserves. I've always been either on the Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts click to just get that information as quickly as possible, but that information isn't as credible, or I go the other way and just go through those scientific papers that are way too, complicated for me to understand, or those long podcasts that require a couple of hours to actually get into it. What I want is for this to be a way to teach myself, this channel, these concepts in a way that I understand visually. And I hope that does the same for you too, if you're asking similar questions. But I just want to make it clear that I'm not an expert in this. I'm just someone trying to learn. And if you are trying to learn too, hopefully this helps you out. So the dictionary definition of VO2 max is the amount of oxygen consumed per milliliter per kilogram of body weight per minute. And why this is useful is because in our body, when we exercise, we use a molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, to work out. Now, ATP is a molecule that stores and transfers energy within cells, and for order for it to be created, it needs oxygen. So the more oxygen that we can get into our cells, the more ATP we can produce, and thus the more we can work out. Be that endurance, be that in, kind of the intensity in which we work out. So how are VO2 max and longevity linked? I am going to use for reference a paper from 2018, and this paper takes a group of people in their early 50s, around 122,000 of them, and it puts them through a number of ETTs, or exercise tolerance tests. Now, weirdly, it doesn't go into the detail as to what these tests are. It just says they use a treadmill, so I'm going to assume running, but it could be something else you do on a treadmill. So these ETTs were to basically to put them into groups by their level of cardiovascular fitness. And the way this happened was that they recorded the MET output of every individual during this task. Now, MET stands for the metabolic equivalence of the task. And this is all relative to one MET, which is how much oxygen we use when we're at rest, which is 3.5 milliliters per kilogram of body weight per minute. So 2 METs is twice that, 3 METs, 3 times that, and it continues. So what they found was, well, first off, what they did is they calculated the amount of METs that people produced when they did this task, and that they used to sort them into groupings. So they had low, below average, above average, high, and elite. Now, elite had roughly 5,000 people in it, and the other 4 groups had roughly a 25% split of the remaining 115,000 participants. So the weightings are fairly even. And what they found when they tested, or when they assessed the number of METs produced against the prevalence of developing diseases such as diabetes, coronary artery disease, they found an inverse relationship. So the higher the METs you could produce, therefore the more intense the exercise you were doing, the more oxygen you can pull into your body and use, the lower the prevalence of these diseases, becoming real. So that meant the people in the high group and people in the elite group who could produce more METs, who could bring more oxygen into their muscles and create more ATP, fuel their workouts, they had a decreased chance of diabetes, coronary artery disease, actually appearing within their lives relative to someone in the low or below average group. And we'll go into exactly what those comparisons look like, but I just think it's an interesting stat to put in there. So if we look at this first graph, what it shows is the survival probability over the next 10 years for those groups, segmented by, below, average, low, high. And what we can see is that group with the low cardiovascular fitness, over the next 10 years, they have just under an 80% chance of survival. And that's a huge jump when you consider how close the rest of the other groups are. So really it shows if you go from low to below average, the benefits are absolutely huge. That first jump, absolutely incredible. Now, the second set of graphs, I think, goes through this in a much better way. And what you can see on the, going up the graph, the y-axis is the adjusted HR, which is the hazard ratio. So this is in essence the risk-adjusted rate of all-cause mortality, which is the chance of dying. And we can see that for all of these groups, as you increase and move up through the groups, your risk-adjusted all-cause mortality will decrease. So you've got a better chance of survival. The biggest jump that we see is from low to below average. That's a 50% decrease in risk-adjusted all-cause mortality. So 50% just going from low to below average. You can see that there are subsequent benefits going from below average to above average to high, and high to elite, but those benefits do tend to taper off. Now, interestingly, this paper found there was no upper limit to the benefit that you can gain, and you can keep going along. You can keep seeing these benefits and this decrease in the risk of death. But it's interesting to see that the biggest jump is from that low to below average, which is definitely doable. Now, table C is quite interesting because it brings in this factor of comorbidities just for reference. So if we look at this table, the comorbidity for smoking, for smokers versus non-smokers, the hazard ratio of all-cause mortality. If you're a smoker, over the next 10 years, and keep in mind this is from the age of 53, over the next 10 years, you've got a 41% greater chance of dying than someone who isn't smoking. Similarly, for coronary artery disease, you've got a 29% chance, a 29% greater chance of dying than someone who doesn't have the disease. And the reason why these are brought up, it's not to show that you can get rid of these risks by, increasing the activity that you're doing by moving up through these groups, but you can offset it. So let's take smoking, for example. And again, this looks at the same period, the chances of all-cause mortality over the next 10 years. Smokers versus non-smokers. Smokers have a 41% increase in the chance of, dying, of mortality over the next 10 years. And keep in mind, this was relative to a group of 53-year-olds. That's a sample. If we look at diabetes, that's a 40% increase. And this isn't to show, again, I'll just say that it's not to show that you can eliminate these risks, but what you can do is offset them. So if we look at the table below, low versus below average, so we see that's a 95% chance, you kind of like doubling your chances of survival if you're going from low to below average. Now, that's not to say it decreases, well, it doesn't kind of eliminate the risk if you are smoking, but the smoking is an increase of 41% going from low to elite. That will offset that with a greater effect. And so you could actually see your survivability chances increase if you are moving up through this and you're taking care of your cardiovascular exercise, which I think is quite an interesting point. What we're saying is that VO2 max, if you can bring more oxygen into your body to use in these exercises and you are more efficient at doing so, you have a decreased chance of developing these diseases and you have a higher chance of, living healthier and for longer. So now we've talked about what it is and the benefits you can get from increasing it. Let's talk about some actions that you can take to actually increase it. Now, the way that resonated with me thinking about VO2 max is Dr. Peter Attia's pyramid method. And Dr. Peter Attia, if you don't know, he is a longevity expert with some fantastic podcasts, blog posts. Highly recommend you go check him out. And he thinks of your cardiovascular health as a pyramid. So the base representing zone 2 exercise. So this is, for those of you who don't know, zone 2 is exercise that you can do quite consistently for a decent period of time while sustaining a slightly strained conversation. It's quite kind of subjective how that is. But the base is zone 2. You can't build a tall pyramid without a strong base, and the height of this pyramid is zone 5. So you need both of those components. Zone 5 being something where you can go close to 100%, close to failure when it comes to cardio, if not to failure. So with both of these factors in play, Dr. Peter Attia recommends an 80-20 split between zone 2 to zone 5. And what this looks like in his ideal week is around 3 hours of cardio in that zone 2 phase, and then one session dedicated for zone 5. What this looks like for me, because I don't have 3 hours to spare for cardio, I do 2 10Ks a week, and then I will do a dedicated zone 5 session just once a week. And this session will take around 25 to 30 minutes, mainly because one of the things you have to take into consideration when doing this zone 5 session is warming up. If you don't warm up, you put yourself at risk of injury. You put yourself at, it's not really a risk, but you don't really gain the benefits that you would like to from this exercise because you can't go close to 100%, which is very important for this. So thoroughly suggest warming up and picking an exercise that you can do at a high intensity without getting injured. So with those components in play, one thing that I like to do for my zone 5 training, I've got a high rocks coming up. So what I favor to do is row a mile as fast as I can. Now, this would be 15 minutes of warm-up, 15-20 minutes of warm-up of varying intensities, and then go non-stop for that 1600 meters. What I'm hoping to see over the next few weeks is that the time taken to do that mile decreases. Now, when we're talking about those zone 5 intervals, the sweet spot is between 3 and 8 minutes. And the only reason I bring that up is because modern HIIT exercises, they're kind of like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or maybe up to a minute on, a minute off, and you're not really touching the lower boundary of that, interval sweet spot. So if you're doing those HIIT exercises, hoping to see an increase in your VO2 max, I might reassess and just kind of increase the amount of time you're doing that exercise for, just have fewer intervals. But one thing I do like around this testing is you can do it however you like. You can do whatever you want. You can ski, you can row, you can run. And actually, Dr. Andrew Huberman and Andy Galpin have something they call the sugarcane method. And what the sugarcane method is first off, is that warm-up. So the first stage, warm up as well as you can for maybe 15 minutes. Then the first round is set a timer for 2 minutes. And let's just imagine in this example that we are running. Set the timer for 2 minutes and run as far as you can in that 2 minutes. Then record that distance, write that distance down. Then rest for 2 minutes. Now in round 2, you're going to record how long it takes to reach the distance you got to in round 1. And if you've done if you went round 1 as hard as you can, if you did that as hard as you can, round 2 should take longer. It might not, but it should take longer. And just kind of record the time it took you to get to that distance. Rest a couple of minutes. And then round 3, you take the time from round 2, and you just set that as the amount of time you're going to run for, and you run as far as you can during that time. And what you should find is that when you do this repeatedly, and I'm not saying to do this every week, they recommend work this in every 2 to 4 weeks, the sugarcane method. What you should see is after continuous times of doing this, your time should decrease, week on week, but you should have round 1 taking the least amount of time, then an increase of time for round 2, and then an increase of time for round 3. I really like this. I'm going to start putting this in play, and I'm going to see how it goes. So another common misconception is, can I improve my VO2 max with just zone 2? No. And the evidence on this isn't definitive, but based on a paper put out in 2023, and I'm going to link all these papers below if you'd like to go and check this out yourself. What they found is that the group that was doing zone 2 cardio for a sustained period of time, I think it was 6 months, over that period of time of consistent, organized zone 2 cardio, at the end of that period, around 40% of respondents were non-responders. They didn't have, an increase in their VO2 max that they could measure. And I think that's just, we don't know. The jury's still out on, zone 2 completely. But being that there's such a high non-respondent rate, I would definitely steer away from it. If you're short on time, because I know that 2-3 hours of zone 2 a week plus zone 5 just isn't doable for some people, I would steer towards making sure you get that zone 5 in and then filling the rest of the time with zone 2. That's what you're going to do, because if we think about that pyramid again, we can still build quite a big pyramid, and the important thing is the area within it. So we still need to build that base, but we can also build that height. So both components are necessary. Now, if we're talking measuring your VO2 max, I would definitely recommend getting this done professionally. There are certain places that will, hook you up to certain machines and will be able to monitor it very scientifically. There are estimations from smartwatches, stuff like that, that will have a look at other biomarkers such as your work rate and heart rate and your power output. And from there, it can get an idea of your VO2 max and how it's improving. But if you want that real accurate measurement, I would definitely go and get it tested professionally. So there we go. Hopefully you've learned something either around what VO2 max is or how to include it into your workout schedule. I know the big takeaway from me was to include a lot more zone 2, hence why I'm doing that second 10K. But I really hope you've learned something, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.